I was born into the sound of hammers striking stones. Egypt had long ceased to be our refuge, it had become our prison. The land that once welcomed our forefather Joseph now groaned under the cruelty of Pharaoh. I grew up watching my people, the children of Israel, bowed under the weight of endless labor, building cities that were not ours, making bricks without straw, sweating under a sun that showed no mercy. I am Jochebed, daughter of Levi, wife to Amram, and mother of dreams I once feared would never live. Each dawn began with the same sound, the crack of the taskmaster's whip and the cry of the weary. Yet even in bondage, the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob burned in our hearts. We whispered them in the night when the Egyptians slept, promises of deliverance, of a God who never forgets his covenant. But as the years passed, those whispers began to fade, drowned by Pharaoh's cruelty. When he decreed that every male child born to a Hebrew woman should be thrown into the Nile, the world around us shattered. Fear became the air we breathed. Still, I could not stop believing that the God of our fathers still watched us, even from the shadows of Egypt. The day I discovered I was with child, I fell to my knees and wept, not only in joy, but in terror. Another son? In this world? Under this decree? Pharaoh's words echoed in my mind, every son that is born you shall cast into the river. I held my belly and whispered to God, if you have given me this life, then you will protect it. Every heartbeat inside me felt like a war between faith and fear. When the child finally came, and I saw his face, I could not breathe. He was radiant, his eyes bright like morning dew. I knew instantly that he was not an ordinary child. There was something about him, a light, a peace, as if heaven itself had placed a mark upon him. I named him Moses, though I would not speak that name aloud for months. To protect him, we hid him, day and night, for 3 long months. Every creak of the door, every passing Egyptian footstep made my heart pound. There were moments I thought I would lose my mind, living between hope and fear. But God gave me strength. Each night, I prayed over that tiny face, whispering, Yahweh, keep him. You see what I cannot control. When he turned 3 months, his cries grew stronger. His little voice that once brought comfort now threatened his safety. I knew I could hide him no longer. That night, I sat alone, holding him close, and I heard the Nile calling, the same river that swallowed countless sons of Israel. I wept until my tears became prayers. Then I rose. If I could not keep him, I would surrender him to the one who gave him. I took papyrus reeds, wove them tightly, and coated them with tar and pitch. Every thread felt like part of my heart being sealed. When it was done, I placed my sleeping son inside, wrapped in soft linen. My daughter Miriam, just a child herself, stood beside me silently, her small hands trembling as she held the basket. Mama, will he die? She whispered. I knelt and held her face. No, my child. He will live, because I am giving him to God. At dawn, we went to the river. My hands refused to let go at first. The water shimmered in the sun, calm and cruel all at once. I whispered, Lord of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You gave him. Now I return him to you. And I set the basket among the reeds. The river carried my tears away. I hid behind the tall grasses, watching the basket drift. Then I saw them, Pharaoh's daughter and her maidservants walking by the riverbank. My heart stopped. The very house that ordered death had now come near my child. But God is never late. Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket, sent her maid to fetch it, and when she opened it, the baby wept. That cry pierced through royal blood and melted her heart. This is one of the Hebrews' children, she said, yet her voice was filled with compassion. From where she hid, Miriam's courage bloomed. My brave daughter stepped forward and asked, Shall I go and call a nurse for you, from the Hebrew women? Pharaoh's daughter nodded, and in that single moment, God turned the river of death into a path of deliverance. Miriam came running to me. Mama, she wants you. I could hardly believe it. The same God who took my son from my arms now returned him to me, safely, freely, and under royal protection. When I stood before Pharaoh's daughter, she smiled and said, Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will give you wages." I wanted to fall to my knees and weep again, this time with joy. The God of Israel had not only spared my son but had also made Pharaoh's own house pay me to raise him. I carried him home, trembling with gratitude. Every feeding, every lullaby, every kiss on his forehead became worship. I told him stories of the God of our fathers, the one who hears cries in the darkness. Though he was to be raised in a palace, I planted truth deep in his heart. When the time came to return him, I did not cry as before. My faith had grown. I knew the hand of God was upon him, and someday, through him, the cries of Israel would be answered. The years passed like the Nile's current, slow, deep, and unstoppable. My son grew in strength and wisdom, his laughter filling our home with light. I taught him about our God, Yahweh, the Deliverer, who made promises that no Pharaoh could erase. I told him of Abraham's faith, Isaac's obedience, and Jacob's persistence. Though he was still a boy, I could see in Moses something unshakable, a heart that did not belong to Egypt. Then the day came when I had to give him back to Pharaoh's daughter. I dressed him in fine linen, washed his face, and held him one last time. He looked at me and smiled, innocent, unaware of the fire burning inside my chest. When I placed him in her arms, my heart whispered, "He is yours, Lord." He would grow among gold, but heaven would guide his heart. I often wondered what he saw in that palace. The walls were tall and cruel, carved with gods that could not speak. The air smelled of incense and power. He ate from golden plates, walked among princes, and was taught the wisdom of Egypt, but I believed that truth once planted cannot die. From afar, I heard whispers about the Hebrew boy the princess had adopted, how he excelled in everything, how even Pharaoh's counselors were astonished at his mind. They said he could debate the elders, solve riddles, and speak like a king. And yet, I knew, the blood of a slave flowed in his veins, and the call of heaven in his heart. I prayed every night. Lord, let him remember who he is. Let the truth rise in him like morning over the desert. The years stretched on. Egypt grew crueler, and the cries of our people louder. Many forgot hope, but I held on to what God had promised Abraham, that after 400 years of bondage, deliverance would come. Sometimes, as I worked or prayed, I would feel the weight of something holy pressing on my spirit, as if heaven itself whispered, "The time is near." Moses was now a man. Word reached us that he often went among the slaves, asking questions, speaking gently to them. There were rumors that he defended a beaten Hebrew one day, that he could not stand seeing injustice. My heart trembled when I heard this. The fire within him had awakened. But fire in Egypt is dangerous. One evening, the news came like a storm, "Moses has killed an Egyptian." I froze. My knees weakened. He had seen a Hebrew beaten by an Egyptian taskmaster and, in his fury, struck the man dead. He hid the body in the sand, but word spread quickly. Pharaoh sought his life. My son, the boy I placed in the Nile, was now being hunted by the same power that once sought to kill him as a baby. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside under the cold stars, whispering, "God, protect him again. As you saved him from the water, save him from the sword." Soon after, I learned he had fled Egypt, gone into the desert, into the land of Midian. My heart broke again, but deep down, I felt a strange peace. God was not finished with him. The desert was not his end, it was his beginning. Years turned into decades. I grew older, my hair silver, my body frail. Many of my generation passed away still longing for deliverance. Sometimes I wondered if I would die before seeing God's promise fulfilled. But each time, I remembered that tiny baby on the Nile, and the miracles that followed. If God could save one child from the waters, he could save a nation from bondage. No one spoke Moses' name anymore. Egypt had erased him like a shadow in the sand. But I knew, God does not forget his instruments. And then, one day, the whispers began again. A man has returned from the wilderness, a man who speaks with power. He says the God of Israel has sent him. My old heart trembled. Could it be? Could it truly be my son? When I heard that Moses had stood before Pharaoh, commanding him to let the people go, my spirit leaped. The same mouth that once cried as a baby now spoke with the authority of heaven. Each plague that struck Egypt was not just a sign of judgment, it was a reminder that the God of Israel reigns. When I saw the Nile turn to blood, I remembered the river that once threatened to take my son. Now it served as a witness to God's vengeance. Every locust, every thunder, every shadow of death was a message. God never forgets his promises. Then came the night of the Passover. We were told to sacrifice a lamb and mark our doorposts with its blood. I felt the same trembling fear I had known years ago by the river, but this time, it wasn't fear of losing a child, it was awe. The angel of death passed through Egypt, yet where the blood was seen, life was spared. When dawn broke, cries filled the land, but among the Hebrews, there was peace. The deliverance had come, and it came through the child I once placed in the Nile. We left Egypt that day, free at last. I walked with my people through the wilderness, every step a miracle, every breath a testimony. And when I looked up at the clouds that guided us by day, I whispered, "Now I understand, Lord. You saved him, to save us all." We walked for days through the wilderness, the dust rising behind our feet like incense before heaven. The young rejoiced, the old wept, and every child born on that journey was a reminder that slavery had ended. Sometimes, as we rested under the stars, I would look at Moses from a distance. He stood tall among the people, his staff glowing faintly in the moonlight, his face calm yet heavy with purpose. I often wondered if he remembered the small house where he first learned to speak, or the songs I sang to him in the quiet of night. But I did not need to ask. Every time he looked toward the people, I saw it, the same compassion that filled his eyes when he was just a child. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Lord, you kept every promise." When we reached the sea and Pharaoh's army pursued us, fear gripped the people again. But I had seen the God of Israel part waters before, not with my eyes, but with my heart. I had watched him part the Nile for a baby. So when Moses raised his staff and the sea split before us, I did not tremble. I held Miriam's hand as the walls of water rose beside us. We crossed on dry ground, each step echoing the faith that began in my small home years ago. When we reached the other side, and the waters crashed over the Egyptians, I fell to my knees. Tears rolled down my face as Miriam lifted her tambourine and led the women in song. I sang too, my voice breaking with age but filled with joy. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. As days turned to months, and months into years, I began to see that deliverance was not just an event, it was a journey. Freedom is not learned in a night, it grows in the wilderness. Each time I watched the pillar of fire at night, I thought of how God had guided me before, through fear, through surrender, through the waters. Every motherly tear had been a seed of faith. Sometimes young mothers would come to me, asking, "Mother Jochebed, how did you endure Pharaoh's cruelty?" I would smile and say, "I did not endure by my own strength. I endured because I knew who gave life, and I trusted him with it." Now that I am old, I see clearly what I could not see then, that faith is not loud. It is the quiet decision to trust God when everything around you screams to fear. I did not raise armies, or speak before kings, or perform miracles, yet through my simple obedience, God raised one who did. Moses' courage came from my surrender. His strength came from the stories I whispered into his heart when he was still a child. My womb gave him life, but my faith gave him purpose. And this is what I have learned. A mother's faith can move more than mountains, it can shape generations. When the time comes for me to rest, I will not fear. I have seen the power of God's mercy with my own eyes. The same God who brought my son from the waters will carry me through the river of death into his eternal promise. If I could leave a message for the generations after me, it would be this: trust God even when the law is against you. His command is higher than man's decree. Do not despise small beginnings. A basket on the Nile can carry a nation's destiny. Teach your children truth early. Even if they grow in palaces of pride, the truth will call them home. Faith is not seen in comfort but in surrender. God rewards quiet courage. Every act of trust, no matter how hidden, becomes part of His greater plan. Your story may begin with fear, but it will end with freedom. Motherhood is sacred work. It is the first altar where God's miracles begin. Never underestimate what your obedience can birth. Wait for God's timing. Deliverance often grows in silence. Remember, the God who rescues one child can rescue an entire people. As I close my eyes and breathe my last under the wilderness sky, I see the Nile once more, calm, shining, holy. But this time it does not frighten me. The river that once threatened to take my child now flows with peace. It reminds me that what we surrender to God never truly leaves us. It returns, transformed by His power. I see my son, Moses, standing tall among the people, his staff raised toward heaven. I see Miriam dancing, Aaron blessing, and the nation of Israel walking into destiny. And I whisper one final prayer: Lord, let my story remind them that faith still works miracles. Then, the desert wind carries my soul to the same God who once carried a baby through the waters. They will speak of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, leaders of nations, voices of prophecy and law. But behind them stands a woman history nearly forgot, whose faith dared to defy a king. That woman is Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, whose name means "the Lord is glory." And indeed, in my weakness, His glory was revealed. The wilderness is quiet in ways Egypt never was. There are nights when the only sound is the sighing of the wind through the tents and the flicker of firelight painting our faces gold. In those moments, I close my eyes and remember where we came from. Egypt was noise, the clang of chains, the shouting of taskmasters, the cry of children. But here, in this wide and barren place, there is silence, and in the silence, I have learned that God speaks loudest when the world grows still. When Moses goes up the mountain, I often watch the cloud that hides him. It glows with fire, alive with the power of the God who once saved him from a river. Sometimes, I can almost hear his voice echoing from above, trembling as he speaks with the Almighty face to face. And I think, how strange and beautiful that the same lips that once cried for milk now carry the words of heaven. When Moses descended the mountain carrying the stone tablets, his face shone with light so bright that the people could not look at him. Even I, his mother, trembled at the sight. The boy I once hid from Pharaoh's wrath now carried the law of God Himself, but joy quickly turned to sorrow. While Moses had been on the mountain, the people had turned away, building a golden calf, bowing to it, dancing before it as though the God who parted the sea had vanished. When I heard this, my heart ached. I had lived long enough to see how quickly fear can make people forget. But I also saw something deeper. Even in our failures, God's mercy still followed us. Moses pleaded for the people. He broke the tablets in grief, but later returned with new ones, carved by God's own hand. That day, I wept not for our sin, but for His grace, a grace that never stops reaching. Every morning, when the dew lifted, flakes like frost covered the ground, white, delicate, sweet. We called it manna. Some murmured that it was not enough, that it was strange and tasteless. But to me, it was a miracle. Each bite reminded me that the same God who fed my faith by the river now fed His people in the desert. I often gathered my portion and sat outside the tent, holding it in my hands before eating. Lord, I would whisper, you once gave me bread from sorrow. Now you give me bread from heaven. I learned that provision is not always abundance, it is enoughness. God was teaching us not just to survive, but to trust Him daily. There were days when even the strongest faith wavered. Some questioned Moses' leadership. Others longed to return to Egypt, to the security of chains rather than the uncertainty of faith. I understood their fear. Change can be harder to bear than bondage. But when I saw the cloud by day and the fire by night, I knew God had not brought us this far to leave us. I remembered my own night of surrender at the Nile, how I had once let go of what I loved most and trusted God to return it to me. So when others doubted, I would tell them, do not measure God by what you see. Measure him by what he has already done. The wilderness became our teacher, and each trial became another reminder that deliverance was not an event, it was a process of faith. One day, I heard that fiery serpents had entered the camp. Many were bitten, and cries of pain filled the air. Fear spread like fire through the tents. But God, in his mercy, told Moses to make a bronze serpent and set it upon a pole. Whoever looked upon it lived. When I saw it lifted high, gleaming in the sun, I thought again of that day by the Nile, the helplessness, the surrender, the faith that saved a life. The serpent was not the power. The act of looking was. Faith still heals when we lift our eyes to what God provides. Now I am old. My steps are slower, my hair silver like the desert sand at dusk. Sometimes I sit outside my tent, watching the horizon where the promised land lies, so near, yet still unseen. I may not live to enter it, but I do not grieve. I have already walked through my promise. I have seen God's faithfulness from the river to the wilderness. I think of Moses often. He carries burdens I never imagined. Leadership is a lonely mountain. But every time I see the fire in his eyes, I know it is the same flame that once burned in me, faith against fear. If I could tell him one thing now, I would say, my son, you were born from surrender. Never stop trusting the God who turned my tears into deliverance. And I know he wouldn't. Each night before I sleep, I whisper a song I once sang as a young mother by the river. Yahweh, you are my shelter, the keeper of what I surrender. You watch over the waters. You guard what I place in your hands. When fear rises, your mercy flows. And every tear becomes a seed of deliverance. This is my legacy, not wealth, not fame, but faith. The same God who used a mother's trembling hands to save a child has used that child to save a nation, and if my life teaches anything, let it be this: faith, once released, never dies. It multiplies. When I sit beneath the fading light of evening, I often hear the laughter of young women drifting across the camp. Their voices remind me of my youth, of a time when fear and faith wrestled inside me like two tides. Sometimes they come to me, asking for stories. They call me Mother Jochebed, as though I were mother to them all. I smile, for in a way, I am. I tell them about Egypt, not the land of wealth the world praises, but the shadowed empire that pressed our backs against the mud. I tell them that freedom did not begin when Pharaoh fell, it began when mothers dared to believe that God still saw them. I see in their eyes the same spark that once burned in mine. They will face their own pharaohs one day, but I pray they will remember that faith was first born in the trembling hands of women. We have traveled so long that the dust of many roads clings to our feet. In the evenings, I watch the women weave linen and wool into blankets for their children. The rhythm of their hands comforts me. It reminds me that even in wandering, we create, we build, we prepare. I think of the basket I once wove by the Nile, how my fingers trembled as I sealed the tar between its reeds. That small act of courage became a story told through generations. Now I watch other women weave, and I know that courage still has a shape. It looks like hands that refuse to stop working while waiting for God's promise. The wilderness has its own way of teaching. Every grain of sand beneath our feet is a reminder of how countless God's mercies are. Sometimes I walk beyond the tents and look at the endless dunes. The wind erases our footprints within moments, and I realize how fragile we are. Yet somehow, God remembers each of us. He remembers the mother who cries in secret, the father who doubts but still obeys, the child who wonders why the journey is so long. We forget, he remembers. That is enough to keep me walking. Sometimes I watch the men teach the young boys the laws Moses received. Their voices carry through the tents, firm, strong, steady. But when they pause, it is often the mothers who lean in to whisper meaning into young hearts. I have learned that faith grows best when both strength and tenderness guard it. Aaron once said to me, "Sister, your faith shaped Moses before he could speak." I smiled, because I knew it was not my doing but God's mercy through a mother's heart. When I see a young boy chase after his mother, or a girl hide beneath her shawl as she prays, I know the story is still being written. Deliverance is never the end, it is the beginning of new faith born in each home. Night in the desert can be colder than stone. Sometimes I wake and sit outside, watching the stars move like slow rivers of light. The fire pillar glows in the distance, a silent guardian. I think about all we left behind, our homes, our gardens, the scent of Nile water after rain. And yet, I do not miss them. What I once called loss, I now see as exchange. I gave God a cradle, and He gave me a nation. The older I grow, the more I understand that His ways are threads woven through time. None of us sees the full tapestry, we only see the strand we hold. One day, a young woman came running to me, breathless. She said her child was sick and asked if I would pray. My hands, old and wrinkled, rested on the small boy's head, and as I prayed, I felt peace flow through me like warm water. When the child opened his eyes, the mother began to cry. She thanked me as though I were the one who healed him, but I shook my head. I told her that a mother's prayer is never measured by volume but by surrender. She smiled and said, "I want to have faith like yours." I answered softly, "Then begin where I began, by trusting God with what you love most." As I grow older, my voice grows thin, but the echo of God's faithfulness grows louder. I hear it in the children's songs, in the laughter that rises from the tents, in the hush of dawn before the camp awakens. Each sound tells me that faith, once lived, never dies, it travels, it echoes. Sometimes I imagine generations yet to come walking through their own deserts. They will not know my name, but the echo of what God did will still whisper to them. That is enough, the Nile is far behind me now, but its waters still move inside my memory. Every wave reminds me of that day I let go, and of the God who caught what I released. I never thought I would see the river again, not the Nile itself, but its memory. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the desert reeds near our camp, I hear the same whisper the water once made when I laid my son upon it. It calls softly, not as a threat, but as a promise fulfilled. The years have changed me. My hands are thin, my steps small, yet my heart feels as vast as the waters that once carried my child to destiny. When I remember that moment, I no longer feel the sting of fear. Instead, I feel the pulse of victory. That river was meant to drown our sons, but it became the cradle of deliverance. What Pharaoh planned for destruction, God transformed into a pathway of redemption. Now, as I watch the children of Israel laugh and run across the sand, I realize something wondrous: every ripple of faith multiplies. My single act of obedience became a flood of salvation that no empire could stop. When Moses comes to visit, I still see the boy beneath the man. He greets me with a reverence that humbles me. Sometimes he sits beside me and tells me about the journey ahead, the promised land, the tribes, the hope that glows beyond the Jordan. His eyes carry both the weight of leadership and the gentleness of a shepherd. I can tell the burden is heavy, yet I remind him that the God who called him from the bush still walks beside him in every step. He laughs softly, and I hear the same sound that once echoed in our small home in Egypt. I tell him, "My son, do not be afraid of what lies beyond. The God who parted the waters once will part them again." And he nods, his face strong and certain. I watch the fire in his eyes, the same fire that burned in that bush and never consumed it. That flame has followed him all his life, and I know it will not fade even after I am gone. Sometimes the camp is quiet after dusk, and the people begin to sing. Their voices rise like incense toward the heavens, songs of freedom, faith, and remembrance. I listen with tears in my eyes, because every melody carries a piece of my story. They sing of deliverance, of plagues overcome, of seas divided, of manna given. But behind every lyric, I hear something deeper, the heartbeat of mothers who refuse to stop believing. I close my eyes and let the music fill me. If I could lift my voice as strong as theirs, I would sing of mercy that never sleeps, of a God who watches over rivers and deserts alike. I would sing that no act of faith is ever forgotten, no tear ever wasted, no sacrifice ever unseen. Our songs will outlive us. They will travel into the hearts of our children, and their children after them, until all the world knows that our God delivers. The morning is softer than any I have known. The wind feels gentle on my face, and the first light of dawn stretches over the desert like a golden shawl. I sense the nearness of God in the stillness. It is not the nearness of fear but of peace, like the hush before a beloved voice speaks. I rise slowly, leaning on my staff, and step outside the tent. The sky is wide and endless, painted with the colors of promise. The pillar of cloud still stands in the distance, glowing faintly in the early sun, a reminder that God's presence never departs. For a moment, I listen, to the murmurs of the camp, to the laughter of children, to the clatter of pots, to the heartbeat of life itself. And I whisper, Lord, you have kept every word. You have been faithful from the river to this wilderness. You have carried me farther than fear ever could. I know my body grows weak, but my spirit feels young, burning with the same courage that once wove a basket by the Nile. If this is my final dawn, let it be one of thanksgiving, not farewell. Moses comes to me again, as he often does when the camp is still. He kneels beside me, and I place my trembling hands on his head. His hair is streaked with silver now, yet in my eyes, he is still the child who once floated on the river. I bless him, not as a prophet, not as a leader, but as a mother. I pray strength into his bones, wisdom into his heart, and endurance into his spirit. Remember, my son, I whisper, God's promises are rivers, they may wind through strange lands, but they never dry up. They always reach the sea. He lifts his eyes to me, and I see tears glistening. Mother, he says softly, your faith taught me to believe before I could even speak. And then I know, my work is finished. The seed I planted in tears has grown into a nation. What greater reward could I ask for than to see my child lead a people to freedom? That night, I lie on my mat and close my eyes. I hear the faint whisper of the wind again, the same voice that spoke through the reeds of the Nile so long ago. But this time it does not sound like water, it sounds like peace. I see not Egypt, not the wilderness, but the river of life flowing beneath heaven's light. It glitters brighter than gold, and in its reflection, I see every act of faith I ever made ripple outward, touching lives beyond number. I see the mothers who will come after me, standing in their own storms, holding on to hope. I see children yet unborn who will rise with courage because one mother dared to believe. And I smile, because the story is not mine alone, it is his. The God of deliverance, the keeper of promises, the one who watched over a basket on the river, has kept me until now. I whisper one last time, into your hands, O Lord, I give what I have carried all my life, my faith, my family, my heart. And as the stars fill the sky, I rest, not in shadow, but in glory. In the days that follow, they say the camp fell silent when the news spread. But there was no mourning, only gratitude. The women gathered around the place where I used to sit, and they told stories, of faith, of courage, of God's power through an ordinary mother. Moses led the people onward, and the journey continued, but he carried with him not just the rod of God, but the prayers of his mother. And even now, when the wind sweeps across the desert, it carries a sound, soft, gentle, eternal. Some say it is the echo of faith, the cry of a mother in Egypt that never truly faded. But I know what it is. It is the river, still flowing, still singing, still keeping its promise. Every act of faith begins small, like a mother's tear, like a basket on a river. Jochebed's story reminds us that what we release into God's hands never truly leaves us. It flows forward, touches generations, and builds the future we cannot yet see. She may have lived in Egypt, but her courage crossed time itself. And today, her echo still whispers to every believer. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to join our growing family of faith. Share this story so her courage can inspire someone else. And leave a comment below. Tell us what part of Jochebed's journey strengthened your faith today. Because together, we're telling the stories the world has forgotten and stories of women whose faith moved heaven.